Okay, welcome to the live broadcast here. Namaste. I'm happy to be with you and to share that there's been lots and lots of people who have written in with questions and greetings with respect to tonight's broadcast. And I really want to thank everybody who's mentioned this new setup that we have and given their input. And I appreciate your encouragement with our new technical situation and stage set here. And I also want to tell you that the questions that have come in tonight are so rich. I could really give a talk on any one of them for most of the broadcast. But I'm hoping that this initial talk that I'll give may speak to several of the topics that have been written in about. And even though they might, what I'm about to speak about may not directly speak to all the details of some of the questions that have come in, I'm hoping that just the basic kind of mechanics or framework that I'll present may be helpful, and you can extrapolate from there with the principles that I'm mentioning in mind and see how they might apply to the questions that you've written in about, or the questions that you may not have written in about, but that you hold in your heart and in your being and in your day to day life and in the deep intentions of your practice. So I welcome each and every one of you from many, many, many parts of the world. And I want to begin with one question in particular that's going to be the basis of the short talk I'll be giving tonight before I get into answering more specific Q&A. So as I read the question, see if you can not worry too much about the words, too much about what is trying to be conveyed, but just get the general sense, because I'm using it as a springboard to get into a talk that I hope that you'll get a sense of through more direct experience of the topic. Okay, so this one comes from Eastern Canada, and greetings to you out there. This is someone I know well. And this person says, "Hello, Mukti. That which poses as quote unquote the meditator is me, my, the cognitive idea of I am." So he's sharing his sense of things, and I'll give commentary shortly. That which poses as the meditator is me, my, the cognitive idea of I am, being identified with form. You could say identified in form. That which is aware of this poser, the me, my, is being with a capital B, the formless, aware of form. So this is a lot of words, but I'll get to something that I think might be hopefully informative about this. Then he writes, "Is it being that suffers, incarcerated in form? Is there a gradualism where ego's grip on being lessens?" Ego loves gradual because gradual means never. And then I'll leave it at that. So what I wanted to say is that we have all kinds of ideas about these different words that get tossed about in satsang circles, in spiritual talks, and spiritual communities. And each of us holds our different notions of what some of these words are. And we hold those connotations for those words. And what's interesting about this realm where all these words are like awareness and being and ego are being bandied about is that not only does each person hold those words differently, but even a given person may use those words in many different ways. Um, like the word awareness is a word that we can use an infinite myriad of ways. Just to give you an example, you could be aware that the lights are on, or your computer's on, or that you're sitting down or laying down, or whatever the case may be. And sometimes audio will call this garden variety awareness. Just you're aware of your experience. And there's also awareness that might be referring, the word awareness might refer to a sense of uh, that which is looking out your eyes, and that sense of what informs um, the expression of your consciousness. And that's not really tied to the experience that you're having. It's spoken of more as that which is ever present to all the experiences that come and go. Sometimes I talk about local awareness, and the sense of being in a body, and having your own particular thoughts, etc. Sometimes I'll talk about global awareness, and how the senses might open into the larger body of life. And sometimes I'll talk about awareness as a sense of what this person from Canada was talking about as a formless awareness, an awareness that you may get a sense of when you wake up in the morning and you know that you've had a night's sleep, or perhaps a good night's rest, or what have you. And the awareness of the passage of time, and that you've been in a different state than the waking state, is something that you might reflect back on. Maybe it had content, a form in the form of dreams, but sometimes in certain states of sleep, there really isn't much content that you can point back to, and in that sense, it can be described as more of a formless state of being, where we're not aware of any particulars. And that same type of um, awareness might be experienced in deep meditation, in states of withdrawal from the senses, and a kind of turning inward, or energetically receding into the core of our being, and into a sense of greater rest and stopping, in a way that may bring us offline, to use a computer term, bring us offline into a state of like powering down from activating the senses. And it's not until we reboot and we see a clear screen that we may realize that we had gone offline, and that we were in a state of formless awareness. So there's other types of awareness that are spoken of, but those are some of the more common ones. Now, in this person's writing, the man from Canada, he speaks about this sense of the meditator. And often in certain states of our experience, we have a basic identity that's most prominent. And so let's say we sit down to meditate, we may have a sense of self that is going about this activity, and may have certain intentions or goals to come to a greater sense of rest and settling, or to open, to be aware of the moment, and what's coming and going, to be aware of, and get a sense, we could say aware of awareness, to get a sense of the awareness that is taking in and bearing witness to all the comings and goings. And so this sense of the meditator can often be familiar, if you have a meditation practice, as a specific, you could say, role, but more than that, just like or more fundamental than that, would be, this sense self at the center of experience that is going about the activity of meditating. Now, one of the true purposes of meditation is to uh, cross from that state of feeling like you have a central sense of self as a meditator and have that kind of yield and give way to a sense of being and abiding not only in the moment, but it feels more like abiding as the moment, because the sense of identity as the meditator gives way to the intimacy with the moment and the experience of the moment. And just like, in a lot of your life experience, when you're completely attuned to a task or to a conversation, to perhaps listening right now, you forget your sense of self. And um, and often that's a pleasant experience when we can, get drawn so deeply into a movie or a hobby or a conversation with another, where we really lose our sense of our personal self and all of its agendas and concerns and history and even ideas about the future. All of that you could say maybe collapses or just dissolves into the activity in which we're losing ourselves. And so in meditation, sometimes when all the distractions or places that we might put our attention, like on other people or activities, when we are not engaging in those, then there can be a opportunity to have all of those energies that would be pumped out into those ways of relating can kind of it can feel like they kind of recede into a sense of stopping and resting, or they may just begin to be something that we don't give particular significance to. Just like all the time things are moving and passing through our experience, like the car going by or the dog barking, that we often will hear in the periphery, but we're not necessarily, putting our attention completely on that and being pulled into it. So all the time we're filtering things out, movements, noises, sounds, you could just say notes of the moment, and yet it's not. It doesn't seem particularly significant that we're not investing our energy in those things. But when we're meditating and our energetic investment really recedes from all of its tracking and managing and engaging, then it can be that all of a sudden things that didn't take on significance before seem really large in our experience. And maybe that clock that's ticking on the wall or that dog that barks next door, all of a sudden it just becomes super magnified because our our energy isn't distracting us from those things. So, as I was saying earlier, one of the goals of meditation is for that sense of the meditator that is felt as the subject that is aware of all these objects in the realm of our experience, for example, the barking or the, the clock, that the meditator is often given instructions like allowing things to be as they are, so that that invitation to allow might wash into the system and inform that sense of oneself as the subject that may be conditioned to have opinions or preferences about what's arising. And it's encouraged to relax out of those preferences and rest in a more elemental sense of the subject. So stepping out of what the gentleman from um, Canada was saying is the me, my, kind of allowing ourselves and encouraging ourselves through this pointer to allow things to be as it is, to step out of the me's preferences and the assigning a sense of my to my thoughts, to my feelings, to my body and how it feels and my preferences, and it's possible to relax out of those assertions and into a more basic sense of ourselves as a subject, which is sometimes called, the fundamental sense of I am. And that sense of I am versus I am hot or I am restless or I am whatever, this fundamental sense of I am, as we become more settled and quiet, may give way to what I might term just a sense of amming or amness. And then that sense of am really doesn't need to be assigned someone or a sense of subject who is doing that amming. It's just simply the sense of being without some need to assert and reference the someone who is being. And so let me just refer back to the email. So that which poses as the meditator is me, my, cognitive, the cognitive idea of I am. Well, it can be cognitive, but they're more importantly, what the pointers to deep meditation are really meant to elicit is a sense of um, feeling the simplicity of simply am, a kind of simplicity of being that is not so much an idea, but a lived experience. And you can say maybe um, an unfettered state of being that's not complicated by all the overlays of the sense of me and my. Um, so at that point, this gentleman asks, is that being identified with form? Well, you could say it's form expressing being. And he uses a capital. Sometimes being is maybe synonymous with spirit, our spirit nature. Is that our spirit nature identified with form? Well, in the sense of being, when we really check out, if you really check out what I'm saying and look to getting a more direct sense, a more basic elemental sense of being without all the overlays, um, then the sense of identification really gives way. And so the question is it being identified with form? It really isn't so identified at that point. When we're thinking we're the meditator, like I gotta get to a still mind, and I've got to get through this next half hour, or I can't move, and all the ideas about ourselves that we um, put forth as our agendas, um, and get it's okay to have an intention and an agenda in this realm. It's in more than okay. It's actually can be important in order to give us focus. But we could say that the one of the agendas or intentions could be to move beyond the sense of the one that asserts agenda. And so it can feel like our consciousness is very identified with form if we're identified as the meditator, but as that is being encouraged to relax, then the idea of identification really gives way, and we're in a different, sometimes I say a different paradigm, or just in a different terrain or state in which the same rules aren't applying because the sense of subject isn't being fed by attachment to the objects or the goals of wanting this experience or that experience. So I'm hoping this is helpful. Really, it may sound like I'm being very intellectual about all this stuff and, breaking it all down and all of that. But really, what I'm hoping is that you just kind of listen to where my words are coming from and get a sense of the various states that I'm speaking to, and feel within yourself, oh, I can feel what Mukti might be saying when she's talking about being identified with the agenda of, wanting my thoughts to be a certain way or my feelings, and then getting a sense of the possibility of what this moment could be like without the need to have that be any certain way. And that can sometimes be heard as a directive. Oh, I'm supposed to, you know, make all of these things kind of fall away and be surrendered and disappear and be let go of. And it's okay to hear that, but if you then think if you then identify with, I'm the one who's supposed to make that happen, then you could say that instead we swap out the meditator for the doer, and the doer or the seeker of a certain state kicks in, and then that gets off to the races. And so the intention is not so much for me to give you lots of directives, but to invite you into the living question of what is this really basic sense of being that you actually experience all the time, but what is it to be conscious of it within those moments where you see your mind and your my concerns kicking up to wanting a certain outcome or experience. What is it like to sense um, or live with a question? What is expression of being that's not tied to needing to be a certain way? Now, for some people, that can feel fairly threatening, and some people have written in tonight about, fear or um, even terror arising after being in states in which the sense of the central self as meditator, doer, seeker, we could just simply say as subject, yields to a state of being. It could be before that happens. There can be some sense of fear around this, that um, if one were to, drop all of one's agendas, then will they ever be addressed? Will the things that we want ever come to be? Or, um, what who might I be without all of those agendas? And if there is a sense of more consciously recognizing those states where you're just simply being without those assertions, then the more that occurs, the less fear there is of who you would be, because you're comfortable without having the sense of self there. And you all human beings experience this all the time, like I was saying before. Whether you're absorbed in a great book or show, or um, a deep intimate conversation, or a hobby, the most often, what's the right word, resonant moments are those when there's no gap between what's happening in those activities and the sense of the one who's participating in those activities. We're so engaged that the sense of self is absent. And so you can even answer your own questions when those fears arise. Not that it's always that simple, but you can. It's a great place to start to change your focus from going to what could go wrong when something unknown comes to pass to what do I already know of this? What do I already know of abiding in being free of the I thought, free of the sense of me, my, um, and free of the sense of having to reference a sense of center. Now that doesn't mean that a sense what spooks people is they may assume that there'll never be a sense of center, or there'll never be an opportunity to steward what we're going to do, or what we might want to intend, or have seek a certain outcome. And what I can say about that is those functions and roles can still continue, but the question is how much of a sense of fixed me that um, ties its happiness to those outcomes can we do without. So maybe even a wonderful question can be, can there be less of me? Can there be less of the grasping for a certain experience? And so it becomes less about some outcome about the demise of the me, or a state of being in which the me dies. That's a couple of people have written in about the fear of ego death. But when the focus and the way of framing what's happening goes more to a sense of how much of this me is really necessary, and furthermore, is there a sense of me that's present? There might be grasping, there might be a sense of rigidifying, or tension around certain things. But within that hand that's grasping or pushing away, is there actually a me identity? So that's a pointer that, if you've been around these circles very long, you've heard plenty about. So just to continue back to this point of reference of this email, which I think is just a great springboard for this topic of this sense of self without identification, as in a certain role, the meditator, the doer, the seeker, and without a sense of needing to concretize around a fixed sense of center, or self that we may kind of energetically feel in our center, like this is me, in a way that's very gripped. There can be a very, very right sort of resonant sense of center that's like really grounded and rooted, but that typically comes without the sense of identification as that. It simply is and expresses its nature as a sense of center that without identity. Um, okay, so the next sentence he writes is that which is aware of the poser, meaning I think in this case he was referring to the meditator, is being with a capital B, the formless, aware of form. So in this statement, this person is speaking about a certain type of awareness, which is the awareness of all of this play of everything that I'm talking about, whether it's more rigidified and solid, whether it's moving and grasping and pushing away, which creates this sense of uh, bringing the sense of subject, the verb of doing, and in relation to the world of objects, it brings a whole play that paradigm alive. Um, so the awareness of all of those comings and goings. Now, I don't just mean the subject. It's really what is expressing as seeing. It doesn't need to have an identity as subject. Um, that which is aware is being, the formless aware of form. So you could say that there's this famous Zen phrase: "Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form." So awakening is about that which is aware of form becoming conscious of the very nature of form as itself. So, um, in the paradigm of grasping and wanting a certain outcome, there is this kind of fundamental sense that the world of objects and what I'm grasping after is other than what is other, is outside of myself, and I'm trying to grasp it and bring it into myself. But when there's a deeper sense of the formless recognizing itself as form, you could see how the whole construct and paradigm starts to yield to a completely different way of viewing things. That and this is a little difficult to put into words because it's so outside of the paradigm of subject and object. But let's see, it could be it's not exactly like this, but to share an analogy that might be helpful to just give a taste of what I'm speaking about. You know, when you recognize and you could say are aware of another human being, there's this recognition. There's this something that happens in your consciousness that sees, oh, this is another human being. And this can happen to varying degrees. Like we can see, oh, this is a form that looks like a human being that has this shape. I mean, we may even just see a scarecrow somewhere and think, oh, there's a human being. And then we look a little closer and our awareness tells us that it's not a human being. And that's kind of based on um, our senses cataloging information. But there's also a way of recognizing another human being in a more connected way where um, the very makeup of what we are, we recognize in another person. You know, maybe, you know, we that takes a form of compassion for another person, or um, maybe it takes a form of sexual interest, or you know, it takes all kinds of orders of knowing that light up this direct sense of, oh, this is another human being. But it's not just from the exterior that we know that we're relating to something in other dimensions and levels of human beingness. You know, maybe sexuality is one level. Maybe there's just a sense of a person's spirit, and you know, some might be more kindred spirits, some may not. And but all of that is very instinctual, and there's this knowingness that is a certain kind of awareness that is, you could say, aware knowing. That is, it's quite different, but it's a knowingness that the knowing itself doesn't necessarily have a form, but it can recognize itself expressing in another in form, and then we could say it's conscious of that. Now, depending upon what level uh, we're talking about, that it can be no big deal, or it can be mildly interesting, or it can be riveting, you know, and that's in this kind of intimacy that takes place when there's very little between us in terms of meeting the essence of the moment and the person that we're with. So, is it being that suffers? This is the next question. Incarcerated in form? Is there a gradualism where the ego's grip on being lessens? So, I wouldn't necessarily say that the ego has a grip on being. In this case, capital B, we could say spirit. Um, but we could say this is maybe oversimplifying, but I'm not saying it just to give you more ideas, but to give you a felt sense. We could say, spirit might kind of appear and take the shape of something very concretized and very fixed that becomes identified with itself. And um, we could say that whole energy of amness constellates in this identified, fixated expression, and it might even go into some sort of automatic movement like grasping. And um, and that we could say is the ego's grip that you're speaking of in this question. Is it being that suffers? I would might say that it's a being that appears as an identified one that is suffering, um, but it doesn't necessarily have identity in being. Being usually being spoken of in a way where it doesn't really have identity, and that's why it's often spoken of our spirit nature as that which is free, because it's not defined by the world of form. It can appear as the world of form in all of its various expressions of concretization and distress and suffering, or pleasant states and liberated states, awakened states even. But it's not defined by all of those experiences and coming and going. So is there a gradualism where ego's grip on being lessens? I think I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that being, as you're describing it there, may be unconscious of its own nature as form, and form expressing in these difficult states of suffering. But as we inquire into the nature of self and meditate more and allow our meditative environment bring about the conditions in which uh, the grasping and aversion of ego settle and come to rest, and join a sense of being that is unencumbered by these movements, the more we orient that way through meditation or through this pointer to allow everything to be as it is, like even, allowing the grasping to grasp, but not needing to stop it, um, and furthermore encouraging the grasping to get a feel for that which is not grasping, that which is observing the grasping but not defined by the grasping. Then we have that which is free of grasping, which is looking at the grasping or the constriction, the emotion, the knot, the resistance, whatever it might be. And then what's possible is, can form, not only the formless recognize itself in form, that's more of the goal of realization, but simultaneously can form become conscious, and sometimes it's called have remembrance of that which is free of form. And so sometimes when the grasping feels the presence of that which is watching it, it can kind of be like one of those situations where you're sitting in a room, maybe a cafe or something, and someone comes in and they're looking at you, but your senses aren't aware of it. In terms of, like, you haven't visually seen that person or heard their voice or even heard their footsteps, but something in you becomes aware of this presence, and you have that feeling like somebody's looking at you. And you could say that that's what begins to happen in these constricted or auto-driven patterns of being, where we're just seeking, 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 wanting, 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 grasping, pushing, 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 resisting, resisting, resisting. Those movements are only conscious of what they're doing. So you could say that the gripping only knows gripping, the grasping only knows grasping, until it senses the presence of that in its midst that's not defined by any of that. Until there's enough energy that's receded from all of those activities that it begins to shift into, it's like a transfer of energy from all of this. And it's largely is what happens in meditation. As we settle and come to rest, there's a greater sense that what is obscuring the simplicity of being, that's free of agenda, free of a sense of self, that energy kind of shifts and gets absorbed, and is uptaken in the moment of of seeing, being, and that brightens and gets more energetically imbued with a sense of seeing. And then this, which is doing this, is like it starts to feel like the volume's been turned up on that which is observing it, and that which is observing that grasping or pushing away that is often the very definition of ego. Then it starts to feel like, oh, there's a space around me. There's something outside of grasping. There's something outside of grasping that's not defined by grasping. And then the grasping becomes conscious of something besides its automated movement and expression. And then as it becomes conscious, it starts to open up and maybe even absorb and let in the sense of that which is more still, which is without agenda, which is free of want and free of distress. And so if you feel, like you want to get back to a certain state, that very wanting has this movement. And so you can even ask a question of the wanting, of the very movement, as wherever it registers in your body. You can say, what do you know of freedom from wanting? And it might just sort of be like putting a wrench in some sort of automated mechanism that's like want, 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 want. And then you ask a question like, tell me what you know of being free of wanting. And it's like, what? I'm on the wanting, program. And then it's like, what? There's something besides wanting? Wrench it's like putting a stick in the turning wheel. And all of a sudden it's like it starts to open up, like, oh, freedom from wanting, what's that? And it starts to open to that possibility, and it starts to uptake the possibility of that, and all of a sudden there you go, it's stopped its mechanism of wanting, and it begins to shift the energy that was invested in grasping, and that energy loosens from that, and kind of is becomes receptive to that which surrounds it, like the very space and freedom that surrounds it. Okay, I know I've been talking a long time, but just hang on with me, and then I'm going to get to some of the other questions that were written in. So, is there a gradualism where ego's grip on being lessens? I think that what I could say is there can be a shift that I've been describing, and there is a shift that occurs when the ego grip, which is defined by the ego grip lessening, and that's as the sense of being that's not defined by gripping is registered in the consciousness of a given moment. And so how do we do that? So let's say you have like a grip in your gut, like, no, I don't want that to happen. Like, ooh, like some breaks in your gut. You can experiment with resting your attention into the very felt sense of that, meaning you just kind of get a sense of like, oh, where do I feel it in my body? What's the intensity of it? You may even just kind of intuit. It may have a color. It may feel more, dense and perhaps more dark. Not even necessarily what we associate with a negative dark, but just kind of a felt sense of like a gathering that's gone like almost more rigid. But as you're checking it out and looking at it completely afresh, not calling it an existential grip, not calling it um, resistance, not calling it anything in particular, but almost just getting more of the gestalt or the impression of it, and then the vibration or intensity or shape or color, but without having to analyze it. We're just kind of resting attention in there to join to let our attention touch into it to get a sense, um, and um, if it helps you, you can engage your heart in a way where it's as though you're saying in a loving way to the tension, I'm here for you. I want to know you. I want to sense you and see you and look at you afresh without judgment or conclusion or agenda. And just letting those two things touch one another, the genuine curiosity and the thing that only knows the grip. And as your attention touches the grip, it starts to sense and wake up and let in the presence of something that's offering a different expression. It could be this expression of availability and innocence and ease. And then as that comes in, the grip may begin to have this kind of alchemical process happen in in its kind of uptaking that sense of the space, what's in the space that surrounds it, that's not defined by grip. And and as it uptakes that, we may feel that that grip is like a condensed energy that begins to open, and sometimes a lot of energy gets freed, and maybe a person starts shaking or something can happen, or it can just be like a freedom, like as simple as like when your shoulders are tense and you just let them go, and maybe you just naturally kind of feel more breath come in, more space, and you see that that energy that we concluded had a negative connotation is like raw energy that's condensed and compressed, but it can kind of begin to saturate the space around it, and the space around it can become more palpable with that energy and more rich. And you can discover the rest for yourself. It's just to get a sense of it. But often what will happen over time is that energy that we've assumed was like some sort of tension grip, it actually becomes more of a like a rooted energy that feels good. It's solid but not tight. It's solid but it's replete. It doesn't come from a sense of lack, like something's wrong, I gotta fix it. Like, no, 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 everything's off. To like, yeah, I'm here and solid and good. I'm good. The moment is good. It may not be great, may not be our favorite thing, but in terms of, our preference check boxes, but it can have a sense of arriving and landing back in the moment without being thrown off by the preferences that would want it different. Okay. So you could say the grip on being, which would be instead maybe being showing up as grip. You could say it lessens in the presence of that other definition of expression of being, which is that um, consciousness that's not defined by the grip, that's more spacious and without fixed position, begins to liberate the fixed position through almost like a kind of osmosis, energetic osmosis, you could say. All right, so I'm gonna say, even though there's a little bit more to this email, I think I'll stop at that. And just to summarize, there's lots of different ways of kind of piecing out the pie, and sometimes it's piece out as subject, action, like verb, object, inside, core, outside, point A, point B, the territory between those. And that whole paradigm is often um, ascribed all kinds of roles. The meditator that wants this outcome, or the doer that wants to get to this experience. It's all the tracking and managing of our lives that gets imbued with preferences, and even more so, there's nothing wrong with preferences, by the way, but it's the identification, the grip, the vehemence on them that causes us greater and greater concretization, greater and greater sense of division between what's actually happening and what we want to be happening, that would be different than what's happening, that can create greater and greater suffering and greater separation, and more and more intense identification with sense of self. And that can be a sense of separate self. You could even be an identity with a sense of the united self. But when we're imprisoned to an idea, then we rob ourselves of the direct intimacy of experience that doesn't have the overlay of idea. When we're really intimately abiding in and as this moment, the overlay of our agenda is something that there's not room for, because that intimacy is closer than the bulk of that push pull of agenda um, allows for, you could say. And it's not that you could take this so literally, but more in a felt sense. To overthink it a lot can sometimes rob us from just that sense of, when we're intimate, that push and pull, it gives way. There's not it That push and pull creates distance, and as that relaxes, what remains is a more seamless um, expression of being. In this case, I'm not just talking about being spirit, but just your average, like, human being doing its being thing. And the big being with a capital B that we think of as spirit, and that which is free and unconditionally present, and here for all of the comings and goings of experience, and the very fabric of experiencing, which is this being. These are no longer parsed out in our mind, because there's this intimate expression. Okay, all right, yakety yak. So if you want, you could take a little stretch, and I'm gonna have a sip of water. I'm gonna go into some other questions, and if you feel like you just want to sit with what I've said and kind of hang out in the sense of that, you're welcome to. If you feel like you got some energy for some additional input, then you're welcome to stick around. And got some topics about relationship. We got some topics about. Let's see if I can remember. I think I kind of touched upon some about fear. Um, a sense of wanting to abide more consistently in unencumbered or unidentified awareness. So I've talked to that in great degree, but I can speak more specifically to how people, just like you and I, are out there on the ground engaging these questions. Okay, so we just have about half an hour, and so I'll see if I can get through as many of these as possible. So you might like this portion better if I do succeed at getting through things quickly, because we can cover a lot more ground. Although we covered a lot so far. Okay, this is a question from a woman who says, "I have two questions. I will try to put my questions in words, as I often do not have words for it. My inquiry has evolved to the point that I feel a pull from the self or the silence. In this case, this person's using self with a capital S. That could be closer to what I was talking about earlier as the sense of I am, not the like I am this, I am that, I'm the meditator, I'm the doer, I'm the one who wants, I'm the one who doesn't want. This is just this fundamental sense of I am. And in that sense of I am, even perhaps the sense of I, either you could say it kind of gives way from our notions of the I. It could, and gives way to the moment, which we might call the whole moment the I am. So here we are, back to the question. I feel a pull from the self, capital S, or the silence, capital S, almost as much as I feel my own push towards it. I long to stay in that connection or awareness of the silence as long as possible, but inevitably life and needs pull me out of it, and I need to scramble back to it, sometimes forgetting it. How does one stay with it, aware and functioning in both? Okay, this is a fantastic question. So partly what's good to see is that the mind will ascribe a sense of object to the silence. Um, we can be quietly listening and internally feel very silent and not be referencing it and calling it silence. Um, but when, by contrast, we get caught up and maybe stressed out or overly engaged, and we feel like all that silence and stillness gets obscured by this flurry of engagement in the world of form that may feel um, obscures that silence, then um, then there can be a way that our mind starts to reference the experience we had before, called the silence, as a place, like a place we have to get back to, or a state that we need to grasp for. And so, what I'm talking about, it may not seem very significant on the level of a pointer at first, but check it out. Just live with it a little bit more and see how the mind quickly interpolates this whole narrative. I was in the silence. Now I'm assuming the silence is gone and I have to get back to it. Or the silence is something I have to push to get my way to, as though it's at point B and I'm at point A because I don't feel it, I don't sense it. So notice how the mind constructs this whole journey from A to B. And it asserts that, and it plays that tape enough to where we hear this tape of like the silence isn't present, it's not present, and then it sets up the you know, this the seeking to get to the silence as though it's an object. So imagine that all the movements that would our senses would kind of tick off to give evidence that silence is present. Okay, there's the body's more still, the maybe the sounds in our outer environment are quieter, um, or the sense of the inner environment relax, like the energies that go up into mind and out into its concerns kind of recede and settle and rest, and the mind becomes more quiet. You know, whatever the tick boxes are that tell us silence is present. Um, Imagine that you could suspend all the ways that you gather evidence to make the conclusion that silence is present. Imagine you could just suspend them and live with the question. Um, we could live with a couple different questions. You could live with the question, what is silence that's not defined by all of these things? And that's not a question for your mind, because your mind's going to want to go into its database and check all the facts. This is a question for your very being. What is silence that's not defined by my ideas of silence, even by my experiential reference points for silence? But the way you can ask this question is you can actually ask the question of silence. It can feel almost like you're asking the silence as you enter into it in meditation. You feel you're being pulled toward it, or you feel like you're being curious and you're giving your consciousness to it, the sense of maybe stopping, rest, silence. What if you carry into that this question that may not be in words, because as you said in your writing, you don't necessarily have to use words, but I'm going to use words to give you the direction. It's as if you're carrying with you this question as you meet and are pulled to silence, and silence comes to meet you and draw you into itself. It's as though you bring this question, um, what are you? What is silence? What is stillness? What is silence? What is this? What is the I am? You know, I am what? And so the question's meant to drop you into the mystery, but also to deliver your consciousness from form into the formless, so that the formless might get to experience form consciousness. And silence can kind of feel like, almost like there's, this is a construct I'm putting on it, but almost like there's a doorway in which your consciousness as a human being that directs its attention and its intention and its curiosity, its genuine care to know, you're dropping that into the doorway, and silence can know then that there's a doorway, that the formless silence that's without a knowledge of itself. When you ask it, like, what are you? It kind of goes, kind of like, let's see, let's check it out. And I can borrow your eyes and your ears and your consciousness to um, to further that knowing that's a joined knowing, uh, a joined knowing that the questioner is opening itself to receive, and that the silence is being elicited to discover this, the ground of silence. You could say the formless silence is being elicited through your question. what is silence? It's like, oh, what am I? It's like this form of silence is asking itself, what am I? And it's using your consciousness to come to that knowing. So I hope you can hear me. I tend to be soft in voice, so I'll try to speak louder. So I'm hoping that's really helpful. And then if I can, I said I was going to answer the question short, but that was super long. So let's see. The second question is why, if it needs us to be aware of it, or you could say itself, capital S, why does it not just make it so for all? Why does it not just pull us all into consistent awareness for the benefit of itself and for all? Well, I think in its formless state, it doesn't register need or preference or agenda. It doesn't have, uh, volition necessary. I don't think. I mean, I'm just telling you my sense of it from my own direct experience, not as facts, but maybe as facts. It's kind of like I was using this example earlier, and it's on a different level, but you recognize that fellow human beings all the time, but there's not a part of you necessarily that's saying like, I need to recognize, other fellow human beings as human beings. Um, it's or like, we're using our hands all the time, but it's not like our hand is necessarily in and of itself going, I need to know what a fist is, or I need to know what grasping is. It's just not of that paradigm of of needing uh, needing to be aware. And I know that's not exactly how you're using the word need in the sentence, but there might be some of that in there. So you say, if it needs us to be aware of itself, why does it not just make it so for all? Because it doesn't. It doesn't know. It doesn't have the consciousness to know that itself as form until it's invited, until it's evoked, until it's welcomed into our consciousness through inquiry. And then it's as though, oh, form, what's that? And then you might just be looking out your eyes, just like you might even remember being a kid, just looking out at the world, like, what is this? What is that? This looking that hasn't figured out all of the words and the ideas and the specific texture and distinctiveness of it all. It's just like taking it all in a really receptive way and just kind of seeing what lands and registers and is known, when we put it in our mouth, or when we feel it, that cozy thing, we're getting to know all the distinctiveness, but without knowledge of that, we don't even know that um, that innocence in us doesn't know to enact what you're suggesting. The other thing is consistent awareness is an idea of our own preference, but without our own preference of needing and our own identity in a sense of someone that wants things a certain way. Without that, um, there's nothing outside of a thought in your mind that says that something needs to be consistent. Um, or that states, what is or isn't of benefit. Sometimes the sense of separation can even, or suffering can even, well, this is a big topic, but can even be seen as a benefit in the sense that it can wake us up to what's more deeply important and deeply valued, and it can catalyze a rectification in a more thriving sense of living. Okay, so let's go into a different email. Um, this next person is from Morocco. Thank you so much for writing in. Um, this is a little bit longer email, so I'm going to try to summarize it. This person is saying that they hadn't felt fulfilled by some of their jobs, um, but that the fear of lack or being without those jobs kept them in their jobs. But the question really isn't about jobs ultimately, um, but it moves into a different topic. So this person is saying that they've come to observe their mind projecting fears about money, self-esteem, with respect to work, etc., um, and some identities that relate to their heritage and past. They see their mind projecting these identities and fears, etc. However, they went through a deep and life-changing awakening, and it was clear from the shift that the old neurotic self um, shifted to a completely different being. And this set into motion a whole host of events in their life, um, and a sense of shift in ambitions and friendships and other things. So it also brought about the sense of peace always being in the background. Um, and this huge human transformation seems to make the me incompatible with today's world system. Um, and although this person is very quiet about their awakening, they seem to be perceived as very different and strange. And sometimes that people will sense either subtly or more overtly that there's something different about people who have had shifts in awareness or shifts in their consciousness to recognize the peace that's always present as an expression of their inherent spirit nature. So, and some people are comfortable with that; they're even drawn to it, and other people are uncomfortable with it. So this person says, today as I'm writing you, I feel grief and tears coming down my eyes. Deep inside, I know what is happening. This event is shaking the residue of self still holding on. At least that is what I observe. The separate me who feels threatened by the current challenge, wounded by the dismissal and fear of what it might lose, money, apartment, health. These are themes where it's invested some sense of identity. That's so great. So it not what's happening that it's necessarily easy. I mean, it's not clearly. It's very painful. It sounds like, but what's great is that you've copped to this sense that deep down you know what's happening, and that a lot of what's happening is this sense of identification that is still in place. I just want to get out the highlighter. Like you're seeing that is so powerful. Just seeing that and really letting in the wisdom of that seeing and that observation is going to have a hugely powerful effect. Sometimes people will kind of go, oh, I see that. And it's just kind of like a quick seeing, but it doesn't really penetrate in a way like, oh, I see that. I really see that, and look at that, and look at that. And the part that's looking is in contrast. It really starts to get the sense of the movement to identify. So stick with that knowing that recognizes it. See if you can brighten that and really, um, really acknowledge and receive that. A lot of times the whole game of identification is a constant dismissal of these beautiful insights that we have and this profound wisdom, because we're so habituated to fix and fix and fix. And we assume that the fixing is turning away from this kind of stark simplicity of this knowledge of, oh, that's what's happening. I'm re-identifying with these various things. And it's that identification that creates the grip of fear. And, but remember, like I said earlier, you might go into those grips if you feel safe. I mean, if you feel safe and equipped within yourself to do it on your own. If the fear is like totally overcoming you, this may not be possible, but maybe just titrate even a little bit of awareness, like somehow registering um, the energetic imprint of that fear and seeing if that fear might be able to remember or sense what is present that's not defined by fear. It could even be a sense of space or a sense of, the very ground that you're standing on, or the breath that loosens the grip, and see if you can invite that in. It may not be that simple. You may want the presence of someone to really be there with you in that, but many people are able to do it. I'm saying to some degree. Okay, um, when you say that while throughout the day awareness is aware of itself, it is drawn to the suffering. See, that's the wisdom of recognizing what's happening. Then you say, I cannot stop the thoughts arising. So, very, very astute. What I would say is that there may be some belief that you need to stop the thoughts arising. Um, it's possible that you may ask yourself, what if I don't need to stop the thoughts? What if they can simply be, and they might start to take on that kind of expression more like the cars going by, or the the movements of the clock ticking, or the fan in the room, as you settle into that complete permission to not have to stop the thinking. But the other thing that can be super, super helpful above all is meditation. So the more you give yourself to meditation, you may even feel some angst and feel like you won't be able to meditate. So maybe even start laying down on your back and just having a time to just be, and to let your energy go into your core. Or maybe you start with some walking meditation, or then you start into sitting meditation. But what can be really helpful is thinking of meditation as an environment where the part of yourself that is invested in identification and the part of yourself that's always at peace can co-arise and kind of mutually inform each other, and just kind of be present in the same environment of meditation in a way where you're really intentionally letting them um, not have to be decided for or against. Not keeping them separate, but just allowing them in the space of meditation to be there together. You'll eventually see that two seeming opposites would be the identified self and the disidentified self, that they co-arise, and without the concern to have it be one way or another, you see if you can invite that through. Is it possible to allow these both to be here without taking sides, and just see how they find their relation to one another and inform one another in a way where your system doesn't hold them so much as either or, and getting a sense of that sense of self that translates into your whole energetics and your posture and your being, in a way where the conditions that you've set bring about an outcome that the thought of you doesn't have to to get to the thought of the person that wants to stop their thoughts or fix what's happening, that can take the back seat, or be, given a vacation, so that you just attend to the conditions, just taking your posture, inviting your system to settle. If you can, you can even go into an aligned posture. So if you feel like you're being pulled into thoughts about the future, worries, or the past, things that didn't go well, see if you can come back to aligning your posture and seeing how the energetics just kind of work themselves out around that central axis. Okay. All right. Okay, guys, we got 10 more minutes. So this is a short one, and I hadn't given this a lot of thought ahead of time, so we'll see what happens. Not because I didn't want to, but it just, I was hoping that my response will come in the moment. So this is a person who, let's see. Yeah, this person will know who they are. The people who wrote in will know who they are. So this is, many times I'm experiencing moments of total fear and doom. They have been more and more frequent. Sometimes they are constantly happening. I feel absolutely helpless in these moments. Suddenly, all insights I gained during my spiritual search do not help at all, and I become absolutely certain that I will never be freed from this suffering and that life has turned its back on me. It all hurts so much. So, how to face my ego and my fears, which are convincing me that I'm doomed and that spiritual awakening and freedom is impossible for me. Okay, well, I've answered this in a lot of different ways, mostly through innocent intimacy with how these fears imprint in the environment of your system, in your body, but also in your energetics, in all the movements of grip or grasping or resistance. A lot of times people want to figure all this stuff out in their mind and fix it in their mind. And what I really recommend is giving the mind a break, giving it permission to not have to know the answers, to be, if you can, just be as honest as possible. Maybe it's like, I don't know how to fix this, and feel what it's like not to know. What could be difficult is like that may not feel genuine, because there might be a part of you that's like, but I need to know. I need to know. I don't know how to fix this fear, but the fear is so overwhelming. I've got to know. I've got to know. I've got to fix it. But if it's possible to access the kind of honesty that was informing your writing this is honesty of like, I really want to know how to fix this, but I simply don't. And if you can hear my voice, it's just more giving voice to what is. It's not a judgment. All of us know what I'm talking about, where there's times that we simply don't know. And it doesn't mean we won't come to know. And it doesn't even mean that we should know. It just means that the honest truth is, I don't know, even though I'd like to. But if there's that overlay of, but I'm supposed to know, I've got to know, then that compounds the fear and amps it up. But in that more honest truthfulness, you may feel the volume of the fear back down a bit, and then you might have a greater sense of, oh, maybe there's a different way to look at this that's outside the overlay of having to fix it. And even if you just let that possibility in for a minute, it might be, you'll get the feeling of how it begins to shift things. And I can't like give necessarily like the pill that's just going to make everything better in 1 second, but I'm giving you like the end of the string almost that begins to unravel the the construct of the fear that gets more entrenched. Just creating little gaps around it are super powerful. And sometimes just taking one step and creating one gap can be completely revolutionary to how you're feeling things. So, and you can go back to some of the other suggestions I made. Um, See if you can sit in an aligned posture. If your posture is really aligned, I don't mean rigid necessarily, but it's like a tree growing up to the heavens and rooting down in the earth and opening into the room, but also gathering, keeping its awareness in its core. It's like a balance of all these. If you give your mind this activity to become a tree when you're sitting, in all of its expressions of up and down and out and in and gathered and expanded, if you do that, you're giving your mind a distraction and you're going to the body and the energetics to resolve this. And you're setting in play conditions that are completely different than fear. You're exploring this other mode of being in a way where the fear grip has something else to map to and be conscious of and to remember. So sometimes just basics of getting back to meditation posture can be super helpful. So yes, and with love to you as well. That's how you ended it. Okay. Oh, whoops, that was the person. I'm sorry, I'm mixing two emails. But with love to you too. Um, the last person from Morocco said ended with love to you, but also my love to this person who's hurting so much. Yeah, and that honesty that I was talking about, it really comes from our heart, and it's the love that is the antidote to fear or anecdote. I always get those two mixed up. All right, so the next person, I don't know if I'll make it. We've got 3 more, but let me see if I can do it real quickly. The next person was talking about the loss of this dream and ideal of having a kind of loving intimacy in marriage that would play out in a certain way that he would have liked, and coming to see his resentments around that falling away, which I'm so glad that you've really looked into that and that's happening, and that's just a tremendous start. So I think you've kicked something into the motion that will continue to reveal. But this person asked me if I'd be willing to share vulnerability with my walk in romantic love, the awakening of a love that doesn't need something from another, and my experience of total acceptance of another. And I could say more, but um, I don't tend to talk too much about um, the sexual and sensual parts of my primary relationship with my husband, because that's something for us, and I like to keep that private. However, I can talk in generalities, in a way that I think might be helpful with respect to some of those phrases that I pulled out. And I'm hoping to do this quickly. So, we're beings that really can live in a paradox of having the fundamental knowledge of ourself as the eternal that's without need. There's nothing outside of the infinite that there's nothing outside of the infinite. So it doesn't, it's not really expressive in its essential expression. We could say it's formless state. It's not organized around a sense of need. But we as human beings, we have needs in order to thrive and to feel a deep sense of well-being. We have ideas of what those needs are and how those needs can be met. And it's not necessarily that the way we have it hooked up is the way those needs will be met. And I'll just give you a quick example. Would be that after decade or decade and a half, I'm not even sure, of trying to get pregnant, I wasn't able, with Adya, I wasn't able to get pregnant. We weren't able to get pregnant, you could say, in modern vernacular. And the part of me that was just really hooked up to be a mom, it felt bereft of that avenue of expressing my mothering nature. And what I did is I really knew, like, okay, this energy and this propensity, it needs to find other outlets. And I didn't necessarily have to have them all figured out in my mind, but I had this intention that part of me that wanted to connect with life and express in a certain way would find its inroads into the world. And it can be a strong intention for us, let's say, to find intimacy and connection and rich fulfillment in ways that we may not even know how. But when we start to live with that wondering of how, we start to live with that question in a very open and receptive way. And instead of narrowing it in on a certain idea, there is a way that that open receptivity can, in especially in which we're resting back in a sense of knowledge that spirit functions in a way where it's not mapped to a sense of lack. We're resting back in that sense of um, knowledge that perhaps everything that is ever needed or wanted um, has the possibility of being fed and nourished. And when we open to that possibility, we can become surprised. I became surprised at all the different ways that life put something right in front of me that I could channel and connect with. Like a question like, what is connection? I'm not sure what the question would be for you. What is intimacy? What is connection? You can live with a question like that, and it can start to penetrate everything you're doing. You can start to see, like, wow, is there actually ever a moment without connection? And can the part of me that's insisting on me maybe remember or sense or open to orders of connection that may not fit my idea, but may give me the nourishment that um, that is possible to have. So this may or may not like be satisfying answer at the start, but if you run the experiment, there's a possibility of opening into something that might really, really surprise you in ways that you didn't expect. So I wish you luck with that. And I didn't get to everybody who wrote in, and I'm sorry for that. But I did pretty well. So I'm hoping that I just didn't get to the last couple. So I'm hoping that that was informative and enriching for all of you, not just the people who wrote in, because really the shared experience of being both human and divine, you could say, which ultimately need not be differentiated in being, um, in expressing, um, is something very universal. And so um, this dance between these different expressions of our being and how they might inform one another and become more seamless, you could say, is a dance for all of us, and all of us are learning. And I'm hoping that this time of sharing has been furthering for your learning and abiding in all that you are. So thank you for tuning in, and know that you can also write in for our next show. The next show that I'll be speaking about is going to be on a live broadcast on Wednesday, March 31st, same time, same places that you can access it. And audio there'll be a pre-recorded talk of audios broadcast on March 17th with replays on the 18th. And Audi's returning to his teaching role after taking some time off for sabbatical in April. So you can stay tuned when more comes out about that. Okay, so this talk is being recorded for archive purposes and may be available as an audio download in the future. Kind of depends often too on how the quality translates. You can check at muktisource.org. That's muktisource.org, or watch for information on the upcoming email blasts from Open Gate Sangha. And if you're not on the email list, feel free to go to muktisource.org and check out the various sites. There's one for Audio Mukti and Open Gate, and you can get on the mailing list under Open Gate. So thanks again, and I really, really wish the best for all of you. Namaste.